regards to the people that own that house.
Oh yes, yeah, yeah. They were the Betzers. Now that night I let the civilians out. The boy, Adolf, their son, was 15 years old, and the daughter was, I believe she's a year or two older than him, Elsie.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew they were the youngest kids and the only two children or young folks that went out of there. And then when Deacon Maynard Mintoon, one of our platoon sergeants, went over there and spent the night in that house. See, they rebuilt that house, and it's a famous bed and breakfast place right now. So he and the artillery observer went over there and spent the night in the house. And he took that picture that I have in there, and the picture of the road and the picture of the front of it. And he come back and called me and gave me all those pictures and gave me their name and address. So I wrote Adolf and told him, I was there in the house and what went on. And then
was the house destroyed? I mean,
yes, it was.
And the rest of it, how did the civilians survive?
I don't know.
I mean, that's.
I don't know. Last thing we did was we let them out there, and when they went out, they shot that mayor, and whatever they done with them, I don't know. They moved them off from where we were. I guess presuming think maybe they're going to have some trouble with us, and they're going to have to shoot us, because they had a lot of guys lined up there with automatic weapons and burp guns to take care of us. And
how many guys were in the house that came out?
200.
200?
Yeah. Whole company
was in that house.
Yeah.
Holy moly! You must have been all over each other.
Yeah, it was a big house. You seen that?
Yeah,
house?
Oh yeah, big house.
Now we were on the second floor, and they were on the first floor in the part of the basement, or was where they were, because they wasn't up where we were on the second floor. Only thing that was up there was the company commander and Andy and myself and the secretary, and maybe one or two more. There's one shooting out the east window, and I was firing out the south window, and there was one at the front window, and the captain and the secretary and Andy and I. That's all was up there. So that wasn't that bad. Hagen was up there.
Was it snowing at the time? I mean, did it start snowing yet?
It wasn't right that day, but it had been snowing, and then the next day, late the next evening, it started snowing again. By that time, we'd moved out, and we got pretty sure 2 or 3 miles in behind German line, or behind Fuhren into Germany. And we come to a house, kind of like a farmhouse, and they stopped us there, and they interrogated everybody there. They'd send you in, the next one in, the next one in, till they talked to you and tried to get as much information out of you.
Yeah, what kind of questions did they ask you?
Oh, what's your what outfit
color?
are you? And they knew it was a 28. They didn't want to know what outfit you was. And I said, I don't know. All I know is my serial number. They sent me up here to hold this line, and of course they know better than that too. So, but they already knew it was a 28th, and they'd tell you every now and then, how long you been in the 28th? And I said, what is the 28th? They're picking you for anything that they could. And then they'd go through your bill folder and kind of search it and look at everything, and then they'd kind of get down to serious, trying to make you really tell them something. That, what if something happened to this person here, or this person here, or what if something happened to you and you had to notify this person? Who is this person? I don't know. It's some little girl I met, and that's all you have to tell them.
Did they ask you where you're from? Because obviously, most of the guys in the 28th would have had that Pennsylvania type accent, and I guess you
Never
were
did
kind
ask me where I was from.
No,
No, they never did.
I figured
Yeah.
you could turn your accent on, and they get really confused.
Yeah, they never did tell me, ask me though. They just ask all those other little old questions. Didn't really amount to much, and I guess they felt like they wasn't getting much out of me, so they run me on out of the house. But
Did they take anything out of your wallet? Did they keep?
they took it all out, but when he handed it back to me, he handed it all back to me. Because I didn't have anything in there but a few little pictures. I did have $41 in money. I had 41 $1 bills. I'd carried them all that time, and you didn't have anything you could spend it for, and no place you could buy anything, and I just had them in there, and then just never had took them out. And he looked through that, but he didn't take them out.
And that $41 plays in a few months down the road, right?
It sure does.
And we'll get
I
into
used
that.
it.
Yeah, we'll get into that
Okay.
in a minute. But let's keep on going with now. It's beginning to snow, and
Yeah, it started snowing, and we were walking, all this time, and cold. You just wasn't. I had a field jacket on, and of course I had that little old sweater, and that wool shirt and wool pants, and of course you'd been there all that time. You're pretty well accustomed to the temperature. Some of the guys didn't have a field jacket on, and one or two of them did have an overcoat, and one or two of them had a raincoat they put on. Because the raincoat's pretty warm. It keeps that heat in on your body. But Captain Curitan, I don't know where he'd been sleeping, whether he'd been sleeping up on the third floor or what, but he had some little house shoes on. I mean, pretty nice little house shoes.
like slippers.
Yeah, house slippers. and when we come out, that's all he had on, so he couldn't go back to his quarters and get his shoes. So he was really in bad shape. And somebody had a pair of galoshes, and they gave those galoshes to him before we got Stalag or 4B. They gave him those galoshes because he was having trouble, those little house shoes in the snow and cold. And I imagine his feet froze pretty bad. I don't know. But when we got Stalag or 4B, well, see, they segregated us. They took all the officers and put them in concentration camps, and they took all the privates and put them in work groups. They took all NCOs and started us walking towards Poland. And so we never saw the officers.
Did you ever find out what happened to him?
No.
No.
I heard later on when we got back to Camp Lucky Strike that Lieutenant Simpson was back there somewhere, but I never did see him, and Lieutenant Hab. But that was the only two of our officers that I heard anything about. Never heard anything about Captain Curitan or any of the others.
It makes me wonder why he didn't change his shoes.
Well,
see, I mean, you had to have some. There had to be some time to do that.
Well, I've thought about that a lot now. See, when I went there the morning of the 16th, he apparently was sleeping in one of the rooms in that building, and his shoes and his clothes and everything and whatever he had was there. And when that started hitting the morning of the 16th, well, see, we was all over him for information, on what we need to call a battalion about, or what we need to do in this case, or so on, and what kind of information you want to send down there to Vance's platoon, so on like that. And so we had him pretty busy there all day of the 16th and all night of the 16th. And the same thing on the 17th. So it was just so involved that he never thought, probably that we'd get captured.
Mm-hmm.
And he just thought, those house shoes might be all right. And he didn't have time to go back and get his shoes. So he just kept him on, and then next thing you know, the night of the 18th, here he was a prisoner. And he had them house shoes on. So then it was too late for him to go up to the room and get them. So he walked in them until somebody gave him them galoshes.
Did you sleep at all between the 16th and the 18th? Not a wink.
Not that I can remember.
So you were, by the time you got to the Stalag 4, right? 4B, 2 days after you were captured. After how far was that from the house to,
4B.
Yeah, 4B.
I don't believe we got there in 2 days. I think it was more like 4 or 5 days before we got to 4B. Okay. Now, we had stopped at a house.
Yes.
And spent the night where they interrogated us. And then from there on, and we were in another little old town between that house and 4B, and they stopped us. There was a railroad yard running down through there off to our right, and there was a kind of like a Quonset hut there made out of wood, and they stopped us for some reason, and there was all we could get. It was in that hut, and I heard planes coming, and I looked. I was standing out in the door. There's a guard out there and a guard over there, and I looked up, and there was 250 B-24s coming. I thought, boy, it's great. They're gonna get something. About that time, I saw that smoker bomb. You know what that is?
That's the
when they
first
dropped
one.
that smoker bomb, everybody else turns loose. And they started falling all over that little old town and all over us. And that guard was standing there. One of them hit him as dead on the head as you could drop that bomb. It was probably a 200-pounder. And I couldn't find nothing out there. I couldn't find his gun, him, or his clothes, or anything. And then the main bombs hit in that little old town. And then the guards come down there and got us. The planes went on, and just a few minutes after the bombs fell, they come down there and got us and took us up there and told us to start looking for civilians in the houses where they were tore down. And of course, Andy and I was together, and we wasn't looking for civilians. We was looking for food. So we'd look at every house, and if it didn't look like there's any food there, we'd move on to the next little place.
You hadn't had anything to eat there for over a week.
Not since we
got captured.
Not since the 18th, and we didn't eat anything the 18th. We might have eat about the 16th, but I don't think we eat anything the 17th or the 18th. And then we found that one house had some steps going down in the basement. It was on fire, but we went down in that basement, and the potato bin was over the side, and that fire was burning in that end. And we took a stick and raked those potatoes out, and they were hot. They were really hot. And we ate those potatoes so hot they almost burned our mouth. But they were the best potatoes I believe I've ever eaten. We ate about 3 apiece of them and put 1 apiece in our pocket. And they was around there checking, see if you finding anybody. We come out and told them we couldn't find nobody, so we didn't. By that time, they pretty well searched that little community, so it took us back down to that building. It blew that building down that all those guys were in. Never heard of one of them. It blew the sides plumb off that thing. And the bomb hit there close and lifted the top plumb over it. And the sides went down, and instead of going in, they went out. And it didn't hurt one of our boys. But they got one of those guards, and I don't know how many more that was in that town with us. right across the street from where we were was a German hospital. It had a big red cross on top of it, and those bombs just hit real close to that hospital. It didn't hit it, but it hit in the yard of it and in the road in front of it.
That town was on the way to the prison camp.
No, we was headed to 4B from there.
Oh, okay.
So when we got to 4B, they, of course, we was there 2 nights. They fingerprinted us and photographed us and, of course, segregated us. But when we first got there that day, I had a ring similar to that one. It was black onyx that my sister gave me. And there was a Danish soldier there that was a prisoner. And I traded him that ring for a loaf of bread. And, of course, you know, their loaf of bread is 2 kilograms, I believe it is. And so Andy and I just split that thing in the middle, and we ate that loaf of bread. And I think Andy had a loaf of bread. I had a ring, and he traded it for a can of Eagle brand milk. And he and I ate that later on. And then they, of course, started us marching, and we walked, and we, you know, we'd walk day, sometimes we'd walk day and night. Sometimes we'd hit a town where, a pretty good sized little German town, where they had an armory, and they'd put us in the armory, or, you know, most all those armories were fenced in. They'd put us in there, and they'd set up a machine gun over in that corner, and a machine gun in this corner, and the German youth would take over those machine guns, and they'd guard you. And those kids couldn't have been much over 11, 13-year-old. And they were just right at the age, though, if you'd have moved like they didn't want you to, they was eager to try that gun out. And I'm sure they had been taught to do that. And then some nights the guards would get tired, and we'd be in a little old farm village, and they'd put us in barns. They'd put, you know, so many in that stall, and so many in that stall, and so many in the barn down the road a piece, and that was pretty good, because sometimes in those barns, see, they fed their cattle sugar beets instead of corn, and they'd chop those things up in hunks and feed them, and rutabagas. I don't know whether they fed their cattle all that rutabaga, but every now and then when you'd be putting one of those barns, you could find maybe one of them rutabagas or a sugar beet. Or if they had horses in there, they had barley. They'd put in that trough for the horse, and if you could beat that horse to it, you could get your pocket full of that barley, and you could chew on that for 2 or 3 days. You know, it's hard on your teeth, but you could eat it. And then one night, I don't know whether I ever told you that story or not, but one night they put us in an old barn. We'd been walking for a couple of weeks, and we hadn't had nothing to eat, you know, and they put us in an old barn, and it was a pretty old barn, and there was I don't know how many of us was in that stall, and everybody was just wore out, so the minute that you got in there, everybody was ready to lay down and go to sleep. Well, there was a cow in the stall next to me, and you could hear her, you know, and I kept fooling with that board, and I finally got that board off. It was about that wide, and of course, you know, by the time I'd lost a lot of weight, so I could get to a pretty good crack. So I went in there, and I tried to milk that cow, and I never had milked a cow, so I tried. I could get a drop, but that's all I could get out of that thing, and I figured she had more than that. Andy's daddy ran a dairy in Kansas. So I went back over there and got Andy, and they come back in there. And I'd hold my hands in the helmet, and he'd milk, keep it from making noise, you know, on my hands. And we'd get about that much in there, we'd stop and drink it, and we'd get about that much more. We milked that old cow all night long. And I guess it was probably 4 o'clock, and we quit milking that old cow. And we went back over there and got that board back up there and got it back on the wall. And just about daylight, here come this old farmer out there with his stool and a bucket. He come in there and he sat down, and you could peep through them cracks and see him, you know. He sat down there and he tried milking that old cow, and he tried, and he talked to her for a while, and then he started cussing her. And then he got after he fooled with her for a pretty good while. He went out there and accused the guards of milking her. The guards was outside the door. He told them that's the only way that anybody could get in there was them.
So as a team, you guys always were doing pretty well.
Yeah, we
versus the other guys.
We took a lot of chances as the reason I think we survived as good as we did. And,
about how many fellows were left by that time, or you know the guys were.
We were down to maybe 400 by then, 400 or maybe 450 people by then.
Now this is out of the whole regiment then.
Now see, when we started out, there was probably 1,800 NCOs.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Just NCOs.
Right.
And
you never really did kind of get into a prison camp situation, though. You were always walking.
Yeah, we was only in 4B 2 nights, and the first night we were there, they were fingerprinting us and photographing us and making those dog tags I showed you. The next day, that's when I traded for that loaf of bread, and then that evening we moved out there. Well, no, I was there 2 nights, so we moved out the next morning. But then when we hit Stalag over in 8A, we went in there one evening about 2 o'clock, and the Russians got together and pooled their rice and cooked it and give all of us just about 2 tablespoons full a piece, which we were very thankful for the Russians doing that. And we were there that night and the next night, and we could hear Russian artillery, so they moved us out and started us back. And but now while we were there at that Russian, while we were there at Stalag 8A, there was a British guy come down there you could see the German office up there. He'd come out of the German office and come down there and want to know if any of us had any money. That he had Camel cigarettes for $5 a package. And so 2 or 3 of the guys had $5 and they bought cigarettes. Well, I didn't have any money. See, I'd already spent this $41 at that time for 1 cigarette.
Yeah, if we could, I thought that was a little bit later on. Whenever.
No, that was before this.
Okay.
And
if you could go back to that.
Well, see, back to that. One night they put us into a brickyard. We was in a brickyard, and they had a big old building there. I guess where they stacked brick after before they cured them or after they cured them. I don't know, but it was a big building, but it was cracks where snow could blow in through those cracks on us. But we were in there one night, and we got in there and everybody got settled down. Of course, every time you go in a barn or a place like that and stop, everybody's ready to lay down and go to sleep, because see, sometimes we'd been walking 2 or 3 days and 2 or 3 nights and without stopping, so you was ready to lay down and go to sleep any minute you could get. And so when we got in there about 9 or 10 o'clock, I smelled a cigarette. And man, it was all over the floor in there, just laying all over the floor. And I got up and I started looking for that cigarette, and I stepped on 3 or 4 guys looking for that cigarette, and I found a medic back in the corner, and he had a blanket over him, and he's down under there smoking that cigarette. And I pulled that blanket back, and I told him, I said, give me one of them cigarettes. And he said, I can't do it. And I said, well, yeah, you can. I said, yeah. He said, I only got 1 or 2 left. And I said, well, sell me one of them. He said, no, I can't do that. He said, I just can't get rid of them. I ain't got but 1 or 2. I said, well, then I'm going to take it away from you. He said, well, I'll sell it to you. So I gave him $41 for that one cigarette. And I took that back up there and got Andy, and we got over by the gate of the door and lit that thing up. And I'd take a smoke and I'd hand it to him, and he'd take a puff and he'd hand it back to me. I guess it was that far fire before it ever turned to ashes. And old Hagen's standing there wanting a draw off of it, and we wouldn't give it to him. Finally, it got down to about that long where it burned your finger, and we gave it to Hagen. And then old Hagen stood there and smoked it for 30 minutes.